people, European indentured servants, rising up to fight against economic injustice. And so I want to call us all into the room to understand that this is perhaps the oldest work of rebellion and love in the history of the American experiment, and the most dangerous. And we say that in times when we have been saying for years that we are at the greatest place of division in America since the eve of the Civil War. And we say that, the Civil War only lasted like 4 years, but we've been saying that for multiples of 4 years at this point. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we divided? Well, honestly, you look across Western democracies and Western civilization, if you will, when the people are this divided, when the scapegoating is this ruthless, as you see on Fox News every night about immigrants, it's always the same story. It's a story of Brexit. It's the story of 1936 in Germany. The working people feel like they are trapped in a spiral of downward economic mobility that never ends. And how did we get here in America? Well, we shut down 65,000 factories in the last 30-ish years. 65,000 factories is enough for every city, every town in the United States. What does that mean? It means, look, us college-educated people, we may not feel like we live at this address, but most Americans do. Most Americans now live at the same address. That address is, I live where there used to be a factory. And since it shut down, what shot up was poverty, despair, hopelessness, suicide, meth, opiates. And why did those factories shut down? Because we passed NAFTA. Full stop. So what's the good news now? The good news now is that America is going through its anti-NAFTA moment. We are opening factories. And why are we opening factories? Well, ever since I was a child in both the NAACP and the Sierra Club, two great organizations of my childhood. Sierra Club's been out there like John the Baptist preaching the good news that there's a new thing coming. There's a new way coming. There we will one day be able to power our nation on wind, on solar, drive electric cars with batteries. And that green economy will define the world economy in this century. The only question right now is who will lead it? Will it be China or will it be us? In Detroit, there are people who don't know if they want an electric car, but they know that they want Detroit to make them. Because they don't know when it's in their future, but they know it's in their future. And if you want to see America get even more divided than we are right now, imagine what America would be like without Detroit making automobiles. And if you think that couldn't happen, consider how dominant the textile industry was in the South and the Northeast 30 years ago. They didn't think it could happen either, but it did. And so that's why I'm proud that Sierra Club was the only major green group represented when Joe Biden announced that we would put 100% tariffs on $14,000 Chinese EVs. They can't make them for $14,000. Their government subsidizes them because their middle class was cratering, so they overinvest in the production of hard goods in order to undercut everybody else's domestic supply chain, hoping to overtake it. Well, where's the hope in all this? I recently was in Dalton, Georgia, home of Q-Cells and home of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, when you're in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, I don't think you can get any closer to the heart of darkness in American politics. But I was standing in what will soon be the largest solar panel production facility in the Western Hemisphere, and the only one to produce every aspect of solar panels from soup to nuts outside of China. The only question right now is, does China control 85% of the global solar panel supply chain or 98%? And the workforce was a rainbow of Dalton, Georgia. You got a red-faced brother. I say this is a brother with a white dad and a black mom. And my dad's a country club redneck, but he's a redneck. They got those in Maine. If you haven't been to Maine, Maine is like Georgia without black folks. And so you got, red-faced brothers with long beards, and you got dark-skinned brothers with tight fades, and you got Latino brothers who didn't grow up speaking English, and they're all working in one factory. And lots of sisters, one who rose all the way up, came in there to work from Memphis and built their entire recycling program, started out on the factory floor. But as you're walking out, what you can almost miss are like the 60-odd watercolors and Crayola drawings on the wall. And Reverend Barber, I walked past, and I said, what is this? And they said, oh, that's the Earth Day art contest from last year. It was for the children of the factory workers. We asked them to portray how they see their parents when they go to work. And Bishop, every single, old habits, every single image portrayed their parent as a hero saving humanity, saving the planet. It was impossible to imagine that the children of the NASA engineers could have been more proud of their parents during our moonshot making rockets than these children are of their parents making solar panels, because they understand that this is our Earth shot. And it's also America's best shot at a real comeback. And a nation as united as that rainbow of humanity is on that factory floor. A world beyond white poverty, the title of the book we'll be discussing today. An America beyond white poverty is an America beyond poverty for all of us. We tend to think that racism only hurts black folks. No. Racism is a game to divide working folks. And in a democracy, when you divide a voting bloc, everybody who gets divided sees their power diminished and they get hurt. When Reverend Barber and I were working together, we published a criminal justice agenda, and one of the facts that jumped out there was that by 2010, America did not just have the most incarcerated black people on the planet, we also had the most incarcerated white people on the planet. White men by 2010 had become 75% as likely to be incarcerated as black men in South Africa at the height of apartheid. But here's the thing, the white community is richer than the black community. So what that meant was that poor white men in America were more likely to be incarcerated than black men in South Africa at the height of apartheid when all those brothers were poor. That's the state of America today. So what can we do on that? And I will leave on this. And I told him, because it might go a little long, because before the bishop, you got a jackleg preacher. And an esteemed writer we'll bring up next. One, if John Powell, the great intellectual, was here today, he would say, if we want to change this situation in America, we want to build public support back for everything public, we've got to make the image of the white poor visible in American media again. He studied Western democracies across the board since the days of FDR to today, and what you saw was in about the 1960s, the white poor became invisible in Western media, replaced by the images of black and brown people as if we're the only ones who are poor, and in fact, as if we're only poor. And guess what happened? Public support for everything public in America, where presidents from FDR to LBJ had run against poverty, went off a cliff. Two, we need to change how we talk. Right, this is how psychology works, right? I'm an organized son of two psychologists or psychotherapists. You will hear liberals say again and again, people of color in low-income communities. Well, in a nation where the white poor are invisible, what people hear is low-income people of color communities. Now, they just said people of color in low-income communities. That should be all people of color and low-income people of all colors. But what they hear really is just poor black folks, poor brown folks. So I would ask everybody, if you only do one thing when you leave this room, you just insert one word into that phrase and insist your colleagues do too. You just say people of color in low-income white communities. And somebody might say to you this. They might say, hey, but how many poor white folks are there? Well, twice as many as there are poor black folks. We got 8 million and change poor black folks in America. You got 16 million and change poor white folks in America. And then finally, we got to understand that because what that invisibility allows us to do is to actually push out and fight with hope and be more ambitious in our policy goals in the way that Dr. King was, in the way that old member of the Congress of Racial Equality in Chicago, Bernie Sanders, has been. By understanding there's a different math, Kyle Lewis, that's possible. Because the Democratic Party has stopped talking to poor white men. Full stop. But we can always decide to wake up and be the party of FDR again. We can always decide to wake up and be the party that Martin Luther King helped build again. But it takes courage. It takes vision. It takes wisdom. And it takes the determination and the clarity that led our next speaker, co-author of this book, and my fellow former federal page, I for Leon Panetta, him for Strom Thurmond, out of the Republican Party and into the movement. I introduce to you Reverend Dr. Bishop William Barber's co-author, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Jonathan?
Now we're live. Let me say thank you to Ben for the introduction, and thank you to the tens of thousands of people who were on the street in that video that you just watched just several weeks ago for the Poor People's Mass March and Moral Assembly in Washington, D.C. We are here to talk about poor people, the most overlooked swing vote in this election. And I'm grateful for the many, many people who are organizing all across this country who are determined to make sure that they're not overlooked this year. This book, White Poverty, is a book that we wrote because we know that all of what Ben was saying about the need to address poor communities, and especially poor white communities, is critical to the struggle for democracy and for an economy that works for everyone in this country. That's why we wrote the book. I am here just to introduce the primary author of this book because I'm so grateful that we had 25 years to work on it together. And I wanted to tell you why we did. I grew up in tobacco country in North Carolina in the 1980s and 90s in a rural community in the foothills with hillbilly people. We're proud of being hillbillies. It ain't an insult. Hillbilly people who went to church every Sunday and loved Jesus. And at the time when I was growing up, there was a movement in this country, a political movement, that decided they were going to use our church to organize my people for the Republican Party. That's as simple as I can say it. And they distorted our faith and were twisting it to make us think that our traditional values meant we should support the Republican Party. I got caught up in that as a young person. That's why I paged for Strom Thurmond when I was 17 years old. And I got close enough to what was really happening to see that it didn't quite line up with what the Sunday school teachers had taught me that Jesus said. But I had no other way in my 17 years of experience of connecting a faith in the Bible and what it says with how you live in public life until I met this man at a meeting in Raleigh, North Carolina that the governor's office had organized for young political hopefuls like me. And I came up to him and I said, "Would you come and preach at my church?" And he said to this kid from the sticks, "If you get your pastor to invite me, I'll come." He didn't know that my best friend was the pastor's son, and we were going home to have dinner with his family, and he was just the sort of person who would invite him. I'm here today because Bishop William Barber, was willing to come to a rural, poor, white community in the late 1990s and believe a message that says people like that can join together with other people to make this a better country. And he was prophetic enough in the biblical tradition to tell me the truth about how I'd been lied to, but also to link arms with me and with folks there and say we can move forward together to something better. That is moral fusion politics. That is the gospel that this brother has been preaching. And we wrote this book because in communities across America, we've had a chance to meet people who, when spoken to, understand that this is good news for all of us. So I just want to do one simple thing, and that is to be here today to say thank you to my brother. Thank you for coming all those years ago. Thank you for continuing to go to communities like the one that I'm from, and thank you for believing that it's possible for us to be brothers, and for the ties that bind, the blessed ties that bind. We sang a song in our churches growing up, "Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love." Those ties are enough to lead us together to a reconstruction of this United States of America. That's why we wrote the book. That's why we're here today. Let me, please stand on your feet and join me in welcoming the prophet of this land who's willing to go to places like where I'm from, Bishop William Barber.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Would you all join me in saying forward together? Here you go, John. Forward together. Not one step back. And it's good to be here. You may be seated. It's certainly an honor to be here with all of you, with my dear friend Ben Jealous. Part of what he did not complete in that story is that I had, as he's right, I had protested for voting rights and had not gotten a death threat, had protested health care, denied, had not gotten death threats. But that particular day before that death threat, we had been in the legislature protesting the legislature's cut to money that would lift up poor children. Poor black and white and brown children who would be cut away from and they wanted to use that money to give more tax cuts to the wealthy. And the next morning, a piece came in that said it had Obama looking like a monkey with a slash through it saying you're going to kill him. And I keep it on my phone. It had another one that said, we're going to kill you and you're in the death pool and you'll be dead by Christmas. I hadn't thought about it like that, Ben. You know, really. It's very, very serious. And this brother came. He didn't have to come. And he came down and right after we had been arrested that particular day for simply standing up in the state legislature of North Carolina and saying to the speaker, who's now Senator Tom Tillis, who won because of voter suppression in North Carolina, what doth the Lord require? That's all we said. Literally, standing up in the gallows. We said the gallery. We said, what doth the Lord require when it comes to taking care of our children? And he said, get them out of here. This is my house. Lock them up. I thought it was the people's house. And from there, I thank Jonathan for the invitation, because if I hadn't been challenged to come, even though my family comes from black, free people, mulattoes, and Native Americans, I would have never gone to his community because I knew too much about it. I knew that behind his church was the mountain where the Klan burned their crosses before they left and went to Greensboro and killed people on camera with the assistance of the Greensboro police in 1979. I knew that county, and there was no reason for me to go up there. But the Holy Spirit said go, and we've been friends, and he has really inspired me. This brother went to Iraq when they were bombing Iraq to stay with Muslims who did not necessarily agree with Saddam Hussein, to prove to them that there were some Christians in America that were not just interested in blowing them up. And he now runs a house called the Rupa House, as a tribute to the people he stayed with during the bombing. He drove across the desert, and his car his wife was hit by a bomb, simply to be a witness, to be in person, to be what we call incarnate among people. And so we have deep friends. I won't even tell you about Latasha Brown and I. She's my prayer warrior now, and I just love her and thank God for her. She's the real deal. Give her a hand. Give her a hand. My God, this is Sister the real deal. And my dear sister Pam, who's a coal miner's daughter and a coal miner's wife, is that right? And she reintroduced me, Ben, to my grandfather's home, West Virginia. And as we have talked, we think that her people and my grandfather were a part of the Blair Mountain Wars in the 1920s, when black and white coal miners stood up against the coal bosses, and the U.S. government, the government of West Virginia, and the coal miners bosses dropped Molotov cocktails on top of them. And I was telling her my story of my grandfather, Charles Edgar Patterson, and we were talking, and she said that the folk used to talk about this short Pentecostal holiness preacher, dark-skinned, who was a miner, but who was also very interested in justice issues. And so we think that perhaps our great-grandparents were engaged in the 1920s in fusion politics. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this book, White Poverty. I want to say some broad strokes, and we'll just have a conversation. This is not about, as some people often say, we need to stop talking about race and talk about economics. That's foolish. What this book says, you have to expand the conversation of race, and that there are 5 interlocking injustices that you have to deal with if you're going to seriously deal with poverty and that's systemic racism. We look at it primarily through the lens of voter suppression, immigrant injustice, and the mistreatment of our indigenous people. And you have to show how racism hurts those groups and the collateral damage done to white people. Systemic poverty, ecological devastation / the denial of health care. For instance, in health care, all of the southern states blocked the Affordable Care Act, called it Obamacare, but the majority of the people in each of those states were white that would have benefited from it. In North Carolina, the number of people that were denied health care as long as we denied the Affordable Care Act was 500,000. The number of whites was 350,000, the number of black was 130,000, and 30,000 were veterans. And I often wondered why politicians, particularly Democrats, when they talked about supporting the bill, didn't bring that group of people together. Why didn't they have those folk saying, I'm for this? Why didn't they expand the picture? So systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, the fact that we today spend 53 cents of every discretionary dollar on the war economy, not to help disabled soldiers, but to pay for oftentimes military systems we don't even need, that the Pentagon doesn't even ask for. It's the one place we always get a unified vote. You can guarantee a bipartisan vote when it comes to military economy. And even Eisenhower warned us, a Republican, of the congressional, what he called it, the congressional, what's it called? Excuse me? Yeah, the congressional, we say the military industrial, he said the congressional military industrial complex. They actually cut that out of his speech and made it military, but originally it was congressional. And then the false and distorted moral narrative of white religious nationalism. You cannot unpack and get at these issues without understanding the deep impact that religious nationalism has. How it offers a whole new religion that's counter to Christianity, Judaism, Islam in their orthodox forms, but it's a religion to folk. And in fact, tomorrow we are showing Bad Faith. If any of you are Bad Faith, which is a documentary on the connection between oil money and this false brand of religion, and how it's been operated not from Trump. Trump wasn't smart enough to create it. He inherited it. It's been around. It actually grows out of slave master religion, out of the religious movement of the 1930s that fought against the New Deal, out of the moral majority, and it is in a new evolution today, but it's been around. But the difference today is the amount of money that it has behind it and the amount of media that it has behind it. And it's very dangerous. So those are the 5 interlocking injustices that we believe we have to have an intersectional moral fusion movement. Now, moral fusion is when you bring together people of all races, creeds, and color. They look at issues not as Democrats or Republicans, red versus blue, but through the moral lens, whether it's the moral lens of the Constitution, say, does this bill, does this policy establish justice, does it promote the general welfare, or the deep moral traditions of our faith, love, justice, and mercy. But those things become a place of analysis. So what you have in moral fusion, you have to have first moral analysis. You don't want to be loud and wrong. Get your stuff straight. And then moral articulation. How do you talk about it with terms that have enough flexibility, enough elasticity in them? Because left and right and moderate and liberal, they're too puny. Those words are too puny. They're divisive in that when you speak one. If I say I'm a liberal, then I've cut you off. If you say you're a conservative, you've cut me off. So the language itself produces division. So moral language gives you a different space from which to operate in. Then after moral analysis and agenda, articulation, you have to have a moral agenda. You can't just cry out about what's wrong. You got to speak to what has to be. What's the transformation? And then you have to have moral action, which at times is necessary for even nonviolent direct action, not as a fad, but bringing together people of all different races, creed, and color to put their bodies on the line to change the focus. And the focus of this kind of nonviolence is not to destroy and tear everything apart. It is to produce a third Reconstruction, which we've had 2 constructions, one in 1800, one in the 1960s, but both of them were killed, murdered, and stopped. And so they never finished. So I believe we're right in the middle of the birth pains of a third Reconstruction. And the question is whether we're going to see it through. Now, on the issue of white poverty, quickly, some broad talking points. If you get this, one of the things we say right up front in this book is it's interesting how we talk about these myths. You know, myths can be powerful. You know, myths are used in all kinds of ways, but don't ever discount a myth. You know, some of us went to sleep because of a myth. Mom would come in the room and say, I know the boogeyman's in here, but then let me throw him in the closet. She'd go over to the closet, lock the closet. That was a myth, but it made you go to sleep. Mythology is dangerous. You know, the mythology of American exceptionalism, that nobody else is as good as us. Mythologies can be dangerous. Huh? The mythology, like the mythology that says skin color defines brain size. You can determine brain size and intellect by skin. That's mythology. But mythology can undergird a whole system of slavery, whole system of racism. It was mythology. The mythology of bad biology. You can determine brain size by skin color. Sick sociology, that people can be around each other, but somebody has to be up, somebody has to be down. Political pathology, no matter what conversation you have, if it begins to attack the issue of racism and slavery, that conversation has to be changed. Evil economics, the end justifies the means, so whatever means you use, as long as it gets you money, it doesn't matter. And heretical ontology, God meant it to be this way. Those are the 5 mythological underpinnings of racism and slavery in this nation. So here in the book we say there are 4 these myths. Pale skin is shared interest. In other words, you can't have interests outside of, like pale folk have their own interests, black folk have their own interests. 4, only black folks won't change in America. That's a myth. Poverty is only a black issue. Myth. We can't overcome the division. That's a myth. But we start with the answer in this book. This is interesting. Right? We just said we start with what's the answer, and that is calling out the crisis that we don't want to look at, and declaring that moral fusion has worked in the past and it can still work today. Moral fusion has been the hope of America time and time and time and time again. It was the essence of America after the Civil War. And it was working so fast that the deconstructionists had to stop it. They had to stop it. And you know how they stopped it? They selected a president that lost the popular vote. This stuff new, Ben. They selected a president that lost the popular vote. He promised that he would give the Southerners their power back, and he would change the Supreme Court, and he would ensure that the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was overturned. And the only Supreme Court justice that voted against that was Justice Harlan from East Kentucky, a country boy, right, who voted against undoing the 1875 Civil Rights Act and voted against Plessy versus Ferguson. And it was his dissent that Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall, and others picked up on. And he was from East Kentucky. It was in East Kentucky, up in the mountains, where they started singing before Black Lives Matter ever sung it, "Which side are you on?" Which side are you on, my brother? Which side are you on? It was a white woman who sung it in the face of a sheriff and a mine boss that came to her house to arrest her husband. We don't know these connections, so we live in mythologies, right? Now, here's some broad strokes about this I want to point out. Let me pull this little notebook out, because if I don't have it and I start riffing like a Pentecostal, I'll be up here too long. All right. One thing I saw, one thing I've learned, you got to pay attention. When I came into Witt Hotel, I was paying attention. Up on the wall, I saw something from Emily Dixon. Emily Dixon said, telling the truth is so rare, it's delightful to tell it. So if I'm smiling while I'm telling the truth, it's delightful to tell the truth. And another quote says, the greatest thing, most radical thing you can do in a time of lies is to tell the truth. Tell the truth. So here's some truths. Even in biblical history, every so often, there's this reality that comes into the earth called when the stone that the builders rejected become the chief cornerstone. Psalm 118. And it says, and whenever that happens, it's a day that the Lord has made. I want to argue to you all that we are in a day right now, politically, where the stones that the builders rejected have a power that is yet untapped. Secondly, Jesus started, if you want to be a true evangelical, evangel means good news. When Jesus preached evangelicalism, he said you can't be an evangelical if you don't preach good news to the poor. Full stop. Poor. And the poor in that word is the Greek word patokos, P-T-C-H-O-S, which means those who've been made poor by economic systems of injustice. And the last sermon, that was the first sermon Jesus preached. The last sermon he preached, he said every nation will ultimately be judged by not how moderate it is, and not how it treats the middle class and the wealthy, but how it treats the least of these. He said every nation, not individual. The Greek word there is nation. It means world. It means society. Will be judged by how it treats the sick, the poor, the immigrant, and the least of these. That's a moral framing. Now, I want you to write this down if you can. One of the pieces I'd love for you to get is The Souls of Poor Folk that we produced in 2018, because I do not believe in being loud and wrong. I just detest it. And so before we started anything, the Poor People's Campaign, we now have 42 coordinating committees and 2 million people online, so forth and so on. But before we started anything, we did an analysis of those 5 areas, racism, poverty, with some of the best scholars. And it's called The Souls of Poor Folk. And then we did one recently called Waking the Sleeping Giant. Waking the Sleeping Giant, an in-depth analysis of the power of the poor and low-wage vote. Why it is a sleeping giant in this country, and what caused it. What's the number one reason that poor, and low-wage people have not participated? Because in the last election, 57 million poor and low-wage folk did vote. And contrary to the discussions, the majority of them voted progressive. They didn't vote against their own self-interest, even white. They didn't. We just keep repeating that lie. The majority of them voted progressive. And even in Georgia, right? But 30 million didn't vote. And the difference in the election is that poor and low-wage folk, if they voted at the same percentage that middle-class voters voted, every statewide election and many of your congressional and state legislatures would be changed. All right? The second thing that study taught us, that there are not 37 million poor and low-wage people in this country. That's a myth. There are 140 million poor and low-wage people in this country. Before COVID. COVID did not produce poverty, it exposed it. Didn't produce it. 140 million poor and low wage. And you cannot just say poor and not say low wage, because the way the government measures poverty, they say that if you make about $14,000 a year, you're not poor, you're in the lower middle class. And they use a measurement that was outdated when it was first put into place in the 1960s. So the way we measure poverty is a lie. And the book also teaches that of that 135 million poor, 40 million poor low-wage folk, 55 million at that time were made less than $15. They're working people who made less than a $15 minimum living wage, which is in fact, by the way, that's nothing but what they asked for at the March on Washington in '63. Did you know the agenda of the March on Washington was for jobs and justice, and Dr. King and others wanted, and Bayard Rustin and all, they wanted the minimum wage to be raised by 75% to $2 and indexed with inflation, which if it had, the minimum wage would be about $17, $18 an hour today. We don't ever talk about it. Why is it that we've created a mythology around the March on Washington that it was a black march? That it was only about voting rights? When the agenda was about voting rights and about wages and jobs. And it was white and black together, right? 135 million, 55 million, and when we talk about poverty, and it was amazing, Ben, when we started doing these numbers, because I remember when you wrote that analysis on 30% of folk that weren't registered. You remember when you wrote that analysis, what would happen in the South if just 30% of unregistered folk would be registered and voted? When we, That's right, you sure did. You sure did. And you all should also know that, contrary to what's being told sometimes, it was Ben Jealous who, when he led the NAACP, put the NAACP in a position to register some 400,000 new registered voters, and to, for the first time, use, what's that tracking system that you have? It'll come to me in a minute. You can find out where people are. No, it's not GPS, it's a voting tracking system where you can get name and number. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, That's right, we're getting old. But put it like that, I know because I was his chair of political action. Just like the reason why the NAACP ended up supporting the LGBTQ community, I was the chair that made the motion that NAACP do it. He was the president when I announced it that the NAACP had finally come on board with the rest of the world. So I just want to kind of mention that. But anyway, when we started doing this, Latasha, people said, you can't tell the truth about race and politics. I said, what do you mean can't tell the truth? Well, black folk are going to get mad at you if you say that there are more white people that are poor and low wealth than there are black. I said, but we're going to tell the whole story. And this is the story. 60% of black people are poor and or low wage. That's 26 million people. 60%. 60%. 66 million of white people are poor and or low wage. That's 26 to 27%. So black people in percentage of a race are 40% higher. As a part of the overall total, we're 40 million less. And you have to tell the whole story. 68% of Latinos are poor and low wealth. 68% of Native folk are poor and or low wage. And if you flip that over, you're talking about votes. You're talking about a massive group of people. Now, let me put this in a little state context because I am so tired of these commentators talking about North Carolina wrong now that they claim North Carolina is a battleground state. North Carolina has always been a battleground state. The problem is we didn't battle. National, let me tell you why. In North Carolina, we always elected a Democratic governor and a Democratic House and Senate. We didn't get an extremist state legislature until the Justice Department, over our objections, remember, approved a racist voter suppression plan. That was in 2010. The Holder administration approved it. Now, later on was found to be racist in the courts, and the judge used our language and said that the legislature had created a constitutionally unconstitutionally constituted legislature. But in 2010, the end of the state and the national, we said to the Justice Department, don't pass this. It's racist. It's going to create all kinds of problems for white folk and for black folk. And after it passed, because we had a white woman as governor, the only southern white woman as governor before the one in Mississippi, and she vetoed the voter ID, but she couldn't veto the redistricting plan. It passed, and in 2012, that's when the legislature went a majority extremist. And we elected what I call a little Trump. His name was McCory. But we then turned around with a movement from 2013 to 2017 and sent him home. Unlike any other southern state, North Carolina has always elected Democrat governors and lieutenant governor until recent, very recent. And now it's back again. In the midst, when every other southern state was electing Trump and electing an extremist Republican in their state governorship, North Carolina went the other way. He'll be on stage tomorrow night, Roy Cooper. He just pushed through the Affordable Care Act. I'm almost through. So it's always been a battleground state. And they say, well, Obama won North Carolina in 2008. No, he didn't. Obama lost on election day. How he won was that there was a little movement in North Carolina called the Forward Together Moral Movement. And from 2007, we fought for and won same-day registration and early voting. And then in 2008, we put 1.5 million voters, same-day registration voters, and Obama won doing same-day registration and early vote. He lost on election day, but he won by 14,000 votes, 1,400 votes per county, due to the movement pushing opening the voting possibilities in a southern state. And he won because he listened to some of us who said, if you come to North Carolina, don't just go to Charlotte and Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Raleigh, which is the I-40 corridor. You got to go to Asheville and out to Ashe County and out west. You may not win it all, but you got to go out there, and you got to go east of 95. Pasquotank County, Washington County, Wilson, and you have to pick off some of those counties. And what are they? Poor, low-wage counties where white folk and black folk are poor, low-wage. And he did, and he won. Pasquotank, Wilson, Wayne, Wilson, Wayne, Pitt, and Washington counties, which heretofore were considered extremist counties. Now, when Dems haven't won is when they haven't gone in those places. And they've chosen not to talk to poor white folk and poor black folk and low-wage white folk, and because the fact of the matter is, North Carolina, I heard somebody this morning talking about, well, North Carolina is a toss-up state. How in the hell are you a toss-up state when 42% of your population is poor and low wealth, 39% of your workforce that makes less than $15 an hour, 39% are poor and low wealth? When you have 3 million poor and low-wage voters, and 1.1 million didn't vote in the last election, and the margin of victory for president was only 74,000 votes. What's toss-up is whether or not the party is going to talk to those 3 million folks. Whether you're going to talk to 1 million people who didn't vote. And the data says that when those folks, they are infrequent voters. They're not non-voters. They're infrequent voters. And when they tend to vote progressive, because in North Carolina, for instance, almost 70% of the working population wants a raise in the minimum wage. So if you come to North Carolina, you're only talking about law and order. If you never talk about living wages, you're dismissing over 3 million people, voters, who are black and white and Latino. That's what we're talking about here when we talk about the swing vote, poor and low wage vote being the biggest swing voter. So let me give you a quick one, then we're going to get to our folk here. Did you know, I gave you those numbers, and they're hard numbers until you flip them over. 43% of the adult population in America is poor and or low wage. But if you flip that over, that's a lot of power. 87 million people uninsured or underinsured. But if you flip that over, it's a lot of what? Power. A lot of power. 55 million people who make less than a living wage of $15 an hour. But if you flip that over, it's a lot of power. 50 million people who have had their votes spread, not 50 million black people, but 50 million Americans that are affected when we gutted Section 5, the Voting Rights Act. 50 million Americans. So if you talk about voter suppression as a black issue, a white issue, as an economic issue, you can reach those folk who are mad. 50 million, that's a lot of power. And the number one reason that poor and low-wage voters don't vote, the number one reason in the research, nobody talks to them. It's not voter suppression, even though that's bad, and it's not voter registration. Because in a lot of states, you could register people on the same day. So the issue is, they say, the data says, nobody talks to them. They don't talk to them in the ads. They don't talk to them in the radio ads. They don't talk to them in the mailers. They don't talk to them on the stage. All this week, there have been 3 persons that have mentioned poor and low-wage folk. One of them mentioned before we got here, and that's Vice President Harris in Delaware, when she said part of her freedom analysis, I want a world free of child poverty, and where people can work one job, that's a living wage job, and make. And then Warnock and April with SEIU. Think about that. It's Wednesday. You're talking about 30 million people now. You're talking about 87 million votes that are poor and low wage. 87 million. Linda Lake says, who's one of the best research and pollsters, that the greatest potential for expanding the vote is among the 30 million infrequent voters. And anybody that's not reaching out to them and want to win in a society like we have, where the elections are decided by such low margin, is engaging in political suicide. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about Pam, folk that she introduced me to, Pam from West Virginia, who introduced me to white women in West Virginia who sell tacos on Tuesdays so that they can have a community fund. They work low-wage jobs, but they sell tacos on Tuesdays so that they can have a community fund to help women with their monthly cycles. If you're not talking to them, I'm talking about the other Pam that I met who died in a high school parking lot in Belhaven, North Carolina, when North Carolina refused to accept the Medicaid expansion and the rural hospital got closed. She's a white woman that died from a heart attack 5 minutes from the hospital that was closed. I'm talking about the worker who goes to work in a manufacturing business and then sleeps in their car all night. I'm talking about teachers that are teachers and find themselves pitted against other people in the state in terms of funding and have to go in their own pockets to buy materials, and they themselves are teachers, but technically they are poor and low wage. I'm talking about people who make $50,000 a year and less in a family of 4. That's considered poverty and low wages. I'm talking about the medical workers who helped us during COVID, and we called them essential workers, but treated them like they were expendable. You're essential, but we're not going to give you a living wage. We're not going to give you paid family leave. We're not going to give you guaranteed health care, but you're essential. So at 6 o'clock, we're going to blow our horns and ring bells and tell folk how great. And I'm so tired of people standing up talking and giving all this about this lauding people. They work so hard and they're so hopeful and they work so hard. Yes, you got to work hard when we have not raised the minimum wage since 2009. 2009. Not even when this party had the Senate, had the House, and the presidency. We've not raised the minimum wage for $7.25 since 2009. Prices have gone up. CEO income has gone up. Wage and production has gone up. Politicians, they've raised their own wages, has gone up. And yet we're telling people that make $7.25, they're not poor, because $7.25 times 40 hours a week gets you to about $14,000 a year. Now here's the power. Listen carefully, I'm through. 7 million, I'm going to round them off. 7 million is the number of eligible poor and low-wage votes in Florida. 2.9 million is the number of poor and low-wage voters that did not vote. 300,000 is the margin of victory. If you were serious about winning, you got to go after that vote. But you can't go after it. We're so proud of y'all for working so hard. You're just such great Americans. They want to hear, if I give you the Senate and the House and the presidency, is it going to change my wages? Is it going to impact my health care? Pennsylvania. Everybody saying Pennsylvania's a swing state and all that. 3 million poor and low-wage voters that are eligible right now. In the last election, the number of poor and low-wage voters, most of them already registered, that did not vote, who were eligible, 1.2 million. The margin of victory in 2016, 40,000. 40,000. You got a 1.2 million that didn't vote, that are eligible. Most of them already registered. In the last election, 81,000. In Michigan, the number of poor and low-wage voters is 3.6 million. And you notice I'm not breaking it out by race. It's black, it's white, it's all of that. Most of them are white in terms of the numerical number, right? 3.6 million in Michigan. 1.3 million did not vote in 2016. The margin of victory was 10,000. In 2020, it was 154,000. But you had almost 1.3 million that you could reach into. And then lastly, North Carolina. Over 1 million that didn't vote, and in the last election, the margin of victory was only 74,000 votes. Now, when I mention this to some politicians in Washington, D.C., because, you know, somehow when some politicians get elected, they can't listen anymore. They listen when they're running. But then when they get elected, it's like they know everything. And so I'll say to them, did you know? Oh, well, the reason that is because they're voting against their own self-interest. No. Stop for a minute. Stop living in the mythology, because there's nothing more potent than when your enemy can cause you to repeat their lie. And you believe their lie more than they believe it. Because this morning, you know what Fox News is doing? Talking about poor folk. I'm telling you, right now, I was up this morning at 6 o'clock. I didn't turn on CNN and MSNBC because I knew I wanted to see what was Fox doing. And Fox was on the thing with black and white folk this morning talking about how their party is going to reach the poor and low-wage people and people left behind. You heard Ben say, all you have to do is read history. Every despot, every wannabe dictator has always found a way to lie to poor and low-wage folk and say, if you elect me. And what makes them kind of draw to them is because they present a strong man or strong woman image. And folk are so hurt by being disappointed so many times because we would have a $15 minimum wage at least right now if 8 Democrats and 49 Republicans had not voted in the Senate against the Democratic platform. We got it through the House. It went to the Senate. 8 Democrats, 8 so-called moderate Democrats that King said were the worst enemies of freedom and justice, moderates, voted with 49 Republicans. And you know who would have been the deciding vote? Kamala Harris. Those 8 Democrats had stayed with their own platform. The vote would have been tied. And Kamala Harris would have passed. In fact, it would have been a part of the COVID bill. We would have passed voter bill. But 2, Manchin and Sinema, joined with Republicans and voted. Who would have been the deciding vote? Now, why is that? Now, I'm going to leave you on that. Why is that? Why is it that they had the power to pass living wages 15 and voting rights? And it's in the platform. In fact, in the last platform at the DNC, it says the Democratic Party will be about the business of ending poverty. It's in the platform. But when folk got the power, these so-called moderates, many of whom did not want to see, now I'm going to be racist, a black woman run for office and be able to say, I cast a vote for 55 million people to have a living wage and 43% of black people to be raised up out of poverty. But the power right now, poor and low wage voters have the power. There's not a swing state where poor and low wage voters don't make up 43% of the electorate. And where if just 5% of those voters were mobilized around an agenda, that they could not overcome the past margin of victories in presidential and senatorial elections. Let me say what my grandma would say. What is we gonna do?
Well, what we're going to do right now is we promised a press conference, and so we're coming to questions in just a minute. But before we do, we've got 2 other folks I want to bring in here. Bishop Barber has given us the numbers that are power. He has talked about a way of organizing that power that can make a real difference. And he said the number one reason it hasn't happened is people say nobody talks to us. I've heard you say that, Pam, from West Virginia, more than once. What does that look like? What's the experience of poverty in West Virginia? What does it look like when politicians don't talk to you? And what is it going to take to bring poor folks in West Virginia into this movement?
Thank you. When I read White Poverty, I sat and cried through it, Reverend Barber. Wow. I want you to know that, because I can live it. I live it, and I could feel their pain. And, you know, the Democrats just took us for granted. They've just assumed, because they every once in a while mention a living wage, or they'll mention something, but it's just a mention. You know, I want to have hope, but I'm optimistic. I had hope when the Build Back Better bill came, even Republicans was on Manchin trying to get him to pass that. You know, the one thing I haven't heard is the income inequality that's at a crisis in America. They have went so long. And let me tell you what, when they do give me a minimum wage, don't rake it over 10, 15, 20 years before I get it. Like the last $2 that came into effect when Obama went in there. You know, I started out at $2.65. And it took me that many years to get to $7.25. Well, by the time I got to that $7.25, everything was astronomical. It was like we got nothing. You know, so if you're going to me, I still feel like we're being talked at. We're not being talked to. You know, don't get just in front of a union and talk about a wage. Come to West Virginia and talk to us about a living wage. Because let me tell you what, after NAFTA, they turned our country into a service country. And then they kept us at the slave wages on doing that work. My whole state, when the coal mines went down, what they replaced it with was tourism. What tourism is low-wage jobs. It's restaurants, it's stores, it's gas stations. That's what we got. That's what we're living on. And yet they keep charging more and more and more and more. And then they tell us, well, you're supposed to survive on what you was making 15, 20 years ago. It's the income inequality it's at a crisis. There is not enough money. We do not have enough money to live. What part of that do y'all not get? If you've never lived on $27, $25 an hour, you've got no idea what we do. Just a set of tires to get me through the winter's going to set me back 2 months. And then I'm going to have to try to catch up my utilities that are behind to keep it until I can get caught back up. This is our reality. Get out of your glass houses. That's what I want to tell my legislatures. And let me tell you what, we thought, okay, we were going to get the minimum wage. Question them. Ask your senators, ask these candidates, will you vote for it? Get them on record.
That's right.
Will you give me health care?
Well, and one of the things that I watched you do is, you know, he didn't make the right choice, but you held Manchin to the fire on this. And it's an interesting connection to bring you in, Latasha, because the other thing that Reverend Barber mentioned that Manchin blocked was voting rights. And you run an organization, Black Voters Matter. Black voters do matter. And you get this, what we're talking about. So talk about why voter suppression and voter subversion that targets black folks is hurting everybody, hurting folks like Pam. Why is Joe Manchin concerned with voter suppression when what is West Virginia? 92% white?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about voter suppression, but I'm just going to go with spirit because I have to go with spirit.
Go ahead.
I'm literally sitting here. Thank you, Pam. I'm sitting here really holding back a wall of tears because in a few hours, I'm getting ready to get on an airplane and go bury my cousin who died because she was poor.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Her sister died a month ago because she was poor. My cousin was severely overweight, and the family did what they could, but my family, or her family, the family is extremely poor. We pulled money together to bury the first sister. Insurance canceled their insurance. She was severely obese. She died from a UTI.
Jesus.
She had called me and asked me, I'm sorry.
It's all right, honey.
to go to the doctor with her because in Alabama, they denied her giving her support. And so her son had to change her every day. He did the best he could. But I wound up paying somebody to go to the hospital with her because I was actually out of the country. And she went to the hospital for UTI.
UTI.
They sent her back home because they didn't bother because she was poor. They didn't bother to check her labs. And so 3 days later, they call her and tell her to come back to the hospital because they realized that the infection had set up sepsis. But they had sent her home. And because I knew what it was, I wound up using some politics, and we got to the administrator of the hospital, and she wound up getting some care, but it was too late. It had traveled through her body. But why I had to do that?
Why?
Why I had to do that? My cousin is 57 years old. That is getting ready to die, who is dead, we getting ready to bury her because she was poor. And here I am talking about politics. And so while I want to talk about voter suppression, I want to talk about about why we're here, because we can blame the Republicans all day long. We created Trump. Let me say this. I'm serious. Every one of us sitting in here.
That's right.
That when we accept a system, American exceptionalism, that the foundational basis is that you are better than somebody else, that when you accept that as a truth,
That's right.
that you actually accept other pieces, that as long as you feel better than somebody else, that it's okay for other people to be mistreated in a way that as long as your security is. And so the truth of the matter is Trump is in the space because he is part of the consciousness of not just Republicans, but us. Because we've created this environment that says if you are different than me, if you have less than me, that it's okay for me to dehumanize you. And part of the reason why I fight racism and believe that black liberation is a part for all of us, Pam, is because that is a foundation and a belief in this country that literally is like the evidence of why it's okay to dehumanize somebody. And so that same thing that you see as literally accepting as dehumanizing black folks has dehumanized our white brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, all of us, right? Even to the point that we have internalized it, that when we don't have money, we feel like we have failed. That when we don't have anything, that we feel like we have failed. And so while I want to talk about voting rights and voting registration, until we get our hearts in alignment, that we care about people more than we care about anything else, we will continue to do this, y'all.
That's right.
That this ain't about the Democrats having power or the Republicans having power. This is really around fundamentally our politics will not save us. It will be our humanity. So which of you got the courage? Literally, here it is, the wealthiest country in the world. There is no reason why every single person can't have a guaranteed housing. In the 1972 Democratic platform, it literally was a guarantee. There was a jobs guarantee in that platform. There was a housing guarantee. Think about it. Here we are in 2024. It is almost unconscionable for us to think that. That we're at the point now that you are on the stage and you got to put everybody in the middle class. Well, we know everything about it in middle class.
That's right.
Right? But the fact of the matter is we've accepted, because we also believe in an internalized, that if you are poor, it's because you did something wrong, that you are not good enough, that you didn't do the things that you were supposed to do. And if we're not shifting the consciousness in our own lives, if we're not shifting the consciousness of ourselves, if we really believe that we're going to policy our way out of this, it's really not about a policy. It's really a principle piece around how do we hold people and how do we hold our humanity. And so, yes, we're going to keep having voter suppression and all those things if we don't get our heart in alignment. That at the end of the day, that we can see the intrinsic value of people. Right? That at the end of the day, if we're not literally recognizing that there's enough wealth Here it is. It's the wealthiest the wealthiest country in the world. And my cousin died from a UTI.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm not saying this for anybody to feel sorry for me. I'm saying this because this is real, y'all.
Yeah.
That people every single day are that the abortion issue is a poverty issue.
Right.
We don't want to put the frame on it, but it is, y'all, of who has health care. In some communities we work in, Planned Parenthood, the kids, folks could not even get any kind of health care because there's no OBGYN from miles away. And so we're allowing this nation to demonize and dehumanize people based on their possessions. We're actually ourselves. Here we are. We're sending weapons right now. We're killing brothers and sisters in Palestine. We just sent, what was it, $20 billion? And we ain't upset. We're not mad. One, we're literally using our resources to kill other poor brown brothers and sisters because of who they are. Right, and we got the nerve to say, "God bless America." So I'm sorry.
No, it's exactly right.
The truth of the matter is, the resources are here, right? The intellect is here.
That's right, all of it.
The infrastructure is here. What we don't have is we don't have the political will.
That's right.
And if those of you that are at this convention are on this side saying that we are on this side of this unified, if we ain't there, we're not going to get there, y'all. Right. And so it is, I just hope that in this moment, that this is a breaking in this moment, that this is a breaking at this country, that this is an inflection point, that if anything, in some ways, I know this is going, in some ways, Trump is a gift. Because what he does is he's a reflection. He's saying the quiet parts out loud. Right, and the truth of the matter is, we can put it us versus them, but some of that stuff he's saying, we actually align with. Right. We actually believe and have internalized it, which is why we accept it. Because we would not accept a nation that's sending $20 billion to kill people when we got folks right here that can actually utilize those resources. We would not accept corporations literally getting billions of dollars in this nation. Somebody that's on the way to be a trillionaire, and we call him successful, when our folks, we got millions of people here that are not getting paid. Millions of people here that are going in Atlanta airport. I met a brother and sister that literally, they go to the airport and sleep upstairs on the 3rd floor so that they can get up and go to work the next day. That is real for us, but we're not seeing it because we're not looking. We're not looking, and we don't have the courage to stand in what it means to be uncomfortable, because what they've done is they've also lulled us to sleep. They've lulled us to sleep with all of this stuff that we like. And I'm the first one. I like me some stuff, right? But at the end of the day, if that stuff prevents me from being able to connect and to see my humanity, what we doing this for?
That's right.
I'm sorry.
And Jonathan, part of what is so important about what Tasha says is why we wrote this book, through the lens of people. See, every chapter is a story about somebody. So that when you talk about the 800 people dying today from poverty and low wages, 800 people die today from poverty and low wages. 295,000 will die this year. 350,000 died during COVID, not from COVID, but from the lack of health care. We had one young lady lost 25 members of her family in a 30-mile radius in Mississippi because they didn't expand health care during COVID. COVID didn't kill them. The lack of resources killed them, right? We had people who died doing their work during COVID because we didn't protect poor and low-wage workers. You know what basically? So all this death, and the sad part of it is, you're right, Latasha, is that if you look at our political ads, and I know this to be true because I worked inside of politics. Somewhere, somebody has convinced us that using a word that's in the Constitution is a bad word. You know, promoting the general welfare is in the preamble. But you can't get a politician to say that. If you paid them $1 million, if they run it, you can't get them to say poverty. And they put all these cliches and poetic words around it, like trying to make it into the middle, all this stuff, rather than just saying living wages. I mean, even the ad I just was watching this up here, it said affordable this, affordable that. It did not even say living wages. Even then, And that is not to say, as you said, that somebody said, okay, then that means you must want Trump. That's not about that. What we're saying is, what poor and low-wage folk are saying is, since we are the stone that's been rejected, but we can be the chief cornerstone, we're not going to be silent anymore. So right now, next week, we're starting a thing. We're going on the offensive. We're going to reach 15 million peer-to-peer poor and low-wage voters. And they got an agenda. And when we send this out, we're saying, look at each one of these candidates based on the agenda, right? Not based on personality, because a personality cut on either side could be dangerous. Don't do personality, do agenda. Then decide which one is closest to where you want to be, vote for them, and then when they get in office, worry the heaven out of them. And, you know, in other words, we're not going to just vote and then go home, but we cannot allow our power to be dismissed, not no 30 million people. Because then what we do too, we can internalize the despair, right? That we don't have any power. And what we're trying to do, and that's why we go to West Virginia. In fact, I was in Kentucky. You know how Berkshire won quickly last in Kentucky? Go look at Berkshire's race in Kentucky. He beat an incumbent. How did he do it? He turned some of the counties in East Kentucky. We went out there first. We didn't endorse him, but we got out there and met with poor and low-wage miners and whatnot and showed them their power. We put up on the platform, on the board, all the legislators that voted against them, showed them who they are. And one day, a guy who was a Hatfield, McCoy, his name is McCoy, he stood up and said, I will be damned. We're being played against each other. And we said, yeah, but the question is, have you begun to believe what they're selling? Or you going to change it? They changed it, but they changed it by saying to Bashir, if you get elected, you better bring health care back. You better fight for our union rights and living wages and felony disenfranchisement in Kentucky, right? And he won in 2018, right? So we have to change. And part of what we're trying to say, not only is the we, those of us that may not be poor and low wage, but poor and low wage folk, Pam and others are saying, we have to mobilize our power around a moral agenda and demand, because we every day are 43% of this nation. Every day, 800 folk are dying a day. When we got to 500 folk dying from COVID, we said it was an epidemic. But it is traumatic that in this country, we can have political convention after political convention and not even pause 30 seconds to remember 295,000 people dying a year from poverty and make a commitment that whatever policies could shift that, because every policy that would shift poverty is also beneficial. We lose money through child poverty. It costs us more to keep people in poverty. It costs us more to have people not make a living wage. It costs us, you see what I'm saying? So that's why in this book we talk about all these myths, as you said, that have gotten a hold of us. And since Natasha and I are church folk, there ain't but one way you get rid of a myth. You got to be redeemed. You got to be exorcised. You know, because a myth is like a demon. It's got to be soul work, right? Something soul work has got to call you out of that thing, right? And that's what we got to have, a movement that's calling us out of it. Pam?
We got to be united. I agree, there is state rights. But they have used that to split, divide, and deny. There is some things that needs to be federally regulated. A minimum wage, like what they did with the Affordable Care Act. Now we got half our states are dying without insurance. You got some of them that did, some of them that's got their own little, you know, we have got to be united. And these policies, a living wage should be for everybody. And you know, they talk about the middle class. You want to raise the middle class? You raise from the bottom up, because they take and judge and do what they make by what we make. So the lower they keep us, the lower they keep the middle class. So if they're not speaking to us and you're just talking to the middle class, then half of America you're leaving out.
You're telling the truth.
And then they've took poverty and criminalized it. And to where women now that can't afford this $12, $14, $1,500 a month rent on 213 tips that they're begging people to give them something that they can live on. There should be no sub-minimum wage. We're all worthy. We're all equal, and we all deserve it. And there should be no taxes on their tips. Tax their minimum wage, don't tax their tips. That's how I see that. Quit splitting us and quit playing us games. Quit putting this state against this state against this state.
And y'all see fusion? See, this is what we're trying to do. See that fusion? Imagine that now. Imagine this right here talking to the nations, Latasha and Pam, or Latasha's cousin and Pam. See, this is what we're saying has got to happen on our public stages, at our conventions, you know, and we're going to fight for it and fight for it and fight for it. And if we can't get it here, we're going to build a stage. You know, we had tens of thousands of people on June 29th. We're getting ready to do 15 million. We're going to have a online forum in a few weeks, inviting every candidate that's running 15 minutes to talk directly to poor, you know, and we're not looking at any one election, but this is the election. We've got to show it. Sometimes when you got a stone, you got to throw it so Goliath will wake up. So we got a stone. We got 30 million poor and low wage voters that didn't vote. If we can get 20% of 15 million, we can do some things that makes people say, But if they think we're going to do that and then go home, folk got another thought coming.
Let me tell you, Reverend Barber, what they've done in West Virginia. Because we are the second, we fight with Mississippi. We fight with Louisiana's always there. You know, Louisiana's always number one. Me and Mississippi, us and Mississippi, we go back and forth with 1 and 2. I mean, with 2 and 3. But they keep us poor. We're sleeping in cars because we can't afford the houses. Then they take our kids. Our foster care system is busting at the seams. They took so many of our kids. And then they're going to lock you up and call you unfit because you didn't have a house to put your kids in. What they have done to the poor is their jails are busting out the seams, and 50% of them is sitting in there because they can't afford a bail. They ain't even been tried. They're sitting in there accused and cannot afford bail. We need justice reform. We need real justice reform. And if we're going to have a prosecutor on there, I want to see more than prosecutions. I want to see it totally redone, because it has been changed to against us, to where we're just locked up for being poor. And it's not right. And I'm not shutting up, and I'm not being quiet. And I want answers, and I want it on paper. I want your commitment. I want to hold you to it.
That's it.
That's right.
Thank you, Pam. We promised these folks here that we would take questions.
Okay.
Let me use the few minutes we have left. Is there anybody here who wants to ask someone you've heard from a question? Yeah, let us know who you are. And
I'm Mark Gruenberg from the Washington Bureau of People's World, and I've covered this a lot. You were talking about the low country of North Carolina. Let's duplicate that in some of the other swing states. How are you planning to duplicate what you did there, what you did in those low country counties?
What's the organizing plan?
Yeah, the organizing plan is, first of all, we've got coordinating committees in all of those for our fusion work, and we all work together one way or another. But our specific work, we are targeting 15 states, not 50 this time, where we're turning out these 15, where we're touching these 15 million, because what we've looked at are the numbers. Every state, including like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Florida, and even some of the other southern states, Alabama. Now, when you look at those numbers, there's not one of those states where if you turn 15 to 20%, most of it's under 15, it's something like 9. You could, around an agenda, you could shift the outcome of that electorate with just that piece. So we're doing a very deep dive among specifically poor, low-wage voters who are infrequent voters. The data says when they voted, they tended to vote progressive. For instance, in Georgia, we found out the last time a poor and low-wage voter, 50,000 and below, they voted 54% for the progressive, or well, the Democratic ticket, I'm going to call what. Now, we're not partisan, but that's just a fact. They did, and that's not often talked about. So the answer to your question is and the reason why we're doing this hard push with these 15 million, we're getting the names, the numbers, the information, because we're not stopping after November. In fact, our intensification is going to come post-November. You hear what I'm saying? Because this is, we just can't take this anymore. We can't have another winning the $15 in the House and then it gets to the Senate. So we believe that every moral tool at our disposal, political, moral tool, putting our bodies on the line, you know, I come out of Moral Monday, where we were on the line every year for 2 years, is now on the table. But we first are going to show this power, this voting power.
We've got another question over here. As I'm going, I'll just reiterate that he said earlier, peer-to-peer outreach. So the Poor People's Campaign that has organized poor people is empowering poor people to reach out to poor people through every means possible to make this case.
And Repairs of the Breach is holding that work.
Pacifica Network News. Could you comment, one of the things that happened after the pandemic, we had 4% of the world's population, 12% of the deaths, which was a scandal. And we know that from research that poorer folks died at 8 times the rate of people who are more healthier and wealthier. One of the things that happened is this administration signed a declaration saying the pandemic was over and then unwound Medicaid. We had reached the highest level with the help of the Affordable Care Act. And in clear daylight, 26 million Americans lost their health care. That has not been discussed from the dais. How do we, and then they're surprised when the emergency rooms get crowded.
Again. Well, first of all, you're right. The Congress, first of all, we proved during COVID that investment works.
Yep.
If you invest in child poverty, then you can lift children out of poverty. If you invest in wages, you can. If you invest in healthcare, it works, and it does not hurt the country economically. It actually helps it. The damnedest thing was, as soon as we get a little ways out of it, you pull back. The Congress voted. They said, we're not going to extend this Medicaid expansion any further. So it's almost as though you come to somebody that has a deep septic infection, you treat them, get them that far out of the septic, and then take the treatment out and let the septic come right back, which makes no sense.
That's right.
So, and that then creates more death and more. And the fact that we haven't discussed it as much, and at least said, if we get elected, we're going to restore this. Now, we are hearing more about health care than we did at the other. And so I want to be clear. I'm hopeful in what we're hearing, but I understand something Franklin Delano Roosevelt said years ago when he told A. Philip Randolph, you got to make me do this. Right? It's not just going to be done because we are, as Josh said, we're not just working against another party. You got consultants.
That's right.
Even over here, and I mean, I'm an independent, but even that will tell, don't say poverty, don't say this, don't say this. They're going to call you. They scare candidates to death. They scare them to death. When in fact, going back to his question and yours, in Mississippi, 60% of Republicans now want health care. In every of those southern states, health care and living wages pose over 60%. So when you don't push those things openly and politically, you can't turn around and say we're doing what the American people want, because 60-70% of the American people say wages increase and health care as a matter of right, human right, not as a matter of an executive order, but as a matter of a permanent human right within the framework of a country that says our first priority is to establish justice, which is the question I'm asking. I'm going to say this last. I've been wrestling with this. I'm going to wrestle real quickly out. I'm going to do like Tasha in the spirit. We got one side talking about making America great again, which scares me because I want to know which again you're talking about. Like, like my grandma used to say, where you getting going? You know, where's the again going? Right? The other is we have folk wanting to argue. I saw on a TV show that America is great. Our GNP is this. Our GNP, okay. So, but the question I ask is, but what is the responsibility of greatness? I mean, I don't want the America again is great. Again, I know that's a lie because the behind us can't be all the great. But even if you want that flip argument to that is not to argue, well, yeah, no, we are great because we got the highest GNP. But you got the highest GNP, but you got 43% of your people living in poverty, low wages, 51% of your children. The real thing we ought to be wrestling with, I think, the spirit question is, what is the responsibility of greatness? So if you have a great GNP, it ought to be too great to have this many poor low-wage folks.
Come on.
If you have a great healthcare system, it ought to be too great for anybody not to have healthcare in this country. You see what I'm saying? What is the responsibility of greatness?
Amen.
Don't have an argument about whether you're great or not. We're born, we're a little bit lower than angels. We're great at birth. But the issue is, what do you do with the birth?
Well, a big thanks to everyone here. We've come to the end of our time. We're not going to stop this conversation. We're here to insist that we're going to talk about poor folks here and elsewhere. So thank you for being here for this. Let's keep the conversation going.
I'm supposed to leave at 6 tonight.
Oh, I think we can do better than that. Can we please have a loud round of applause? We at Sierra Club were so honored to partner with Raven Group to sponsor this and help produce this. And I just want to take a moment to celebrate the Fusion Coalition that is the leaders of the Sierra Club who are with us today. We have Shruti Bhatnagar, the first South Asian vice president in the history of the Sierra Club. In the room, I saw earlier Ramon Cruz, the first Latino president of the Sierra Club. We have the incomparable Melinda Barnes, who helped lead the effort to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. Standing next to her, we have Ethan Manuel, who just helped to get, hear this, the National Monument in Springfield. Been working with local communities there for more than 5 years. Thank you, Ethan. And I'll get in trouble because I'm not going to mention everybody, but I will mention we also have Vic Bullock, who came over from the NAACP to lead business partnerships and events for the Sierra Club, and a whole host of just incredible colleagues. It is an honor to work with each of them. And Reverend Barber, we stand with you. We will work with you because we believe that America's best days are ahead and that the green economy is our best shot to rebuild America's manufacturing, drive down poverty, and realize the American dream. Thank you for each of you for being here. Let's help build the future that Reverend Barber and that his co-author Jonathan Wilson Hargrave talked about with such passion today. And that, well, I'm so tired of my dear friend Latasha's pain. Every time I see you, somebody else, some other tragedy. And my family mirrors that too. One of the hardest things about being black, I got a white dad and a black mom, is on the white side, the rich side don't know the poor side of the family. But on the black side, we work with it every day. And to our colleague from West Virginia, thank you for speaking truth to power. Again, thank you to everybody. Appreciate you. Let's build the movement.
Before you all leave, we got a quick 3-minute video. I want to thank Ben so much and say, Ben, that part of this whole poverty piece is we got to make sure that the folk hurt the most by environmental injustice, when the fix comes in, they get the jobs, you know, and that's critical. That's what he's doing. Because that's one of those connections. But if you all will look at this quick video, we want you to see Fusion. We want you to see it, and then help us join it, help us make it. The convention ain't over yet. You know people that you know people. They can make a 3-minute adjustment. Tell them to at least make sure that they have a voice or two. I would say two, maybe these two, or maybe two others, Pam and somebody else, that are poor and low wage, and that they speak from the stage, particularly in that regard, and talk about the policies we have to engage in.
And I would be remiss being here in Illinois if I did not point out Jack Darren, the Illinois chapter director, who's been basically the shadow governor for 25 years on anything green in this state. Jack is incredible. Thank you, and absolutely, you know, the Democratic Party can wake up any day and be the party of FDR again.
Any day.
All right.
Listen, look at this real quickly from June 29th.